So in the previous module, we reviewed what truth conditions and truth conditional semantics means. The reason we did that is because they provide some of the motivation for why we also need a theory of pragmatics, right? So as we discussed in the previous module, we can explain the meaning of some word or some sentence based on its truth conditions. But the problem is truth conditions are not the whole story. And in the module online, we see a lot of examples of situations where the meaning of some utterance seems to be more than or different from the truth conditions of that utterance. So we'll quickly review a few of those examples here. First of all, there are some things that seem to have meaning, but it's not clear that they can be true or false, right? So if I walk up to you and say, hello, is that a true or false sentence? It doesn't seem to me that it can be true or false, right? Same thing for questions like, where do you live? I don't see how that can be true or false, right? And commands or orders or imperatives like, please send me the PowerPoint by Friday. This can't be true or false. But clearly these still mean something, even though they can't be true or false. So there are no conditions for them to be true or false, right? So it seems like there is some kind of meaning that can come from something other than truth conditions. We can also see a lot of examples of how a sentence can be weird or wrong without necessarily being false. So for example, imagine that we talk to each other for 10 minutes and then we wrap up the conversation and then I say hello and walk away. That's very weird, right? Normally I should say goodbye and walk away. So there's something weird about saying hello to end a conversation, but it's not false, right? It's something weird. Can also be sentences like, he ate apples or fruit. This is a very weird sentence, right? Because apples are fruit. But again, it's not false. It could be true, but it's a weird thing to say. And if you think back to our first module, the introduction to the class, there was a discussion about 7 kind of weird sentences, and you had to discuss what makes them weird. None of these sentences are necessarily false sentences. They're just weird. So this is another piece of evidence that there is some aspect of meaning that's more than just truth conditions or what makes things true or false. Last of all, there can be sentences that mean something different from their truth conditions. So for example, in the reading from the Novak textbook, Novak points out that sentences like, I am not unhappy and I am happy don't really seem to mean the same thing, even though literally they have the same truth conditions, right? There's also examples like if I point at someone and say, he's no Einstein, literally that just means he is not Einstein, right? Or his last name is not Einstein. But usually we might also interpret that as meaning he's stupid or he's kind of an idiot. And of course, several modules ago, we looked at the letter from Jonathan to Mary, the letter that was in a bottle in the ocean. And there were a lot of examples there where we could think that the letter means something different than what it literally means. So the bottom line here is that there's more to meaning than just truth conditions, right? So first of all, we don't always speak literally. We don't always say exactly what we mean explicitly. We often use our language to convey something more than just the truth conditions. And another reason that truth conditions don't tell the whole story is that we don't only use language to send messages to people, right? We don't only use language to say things that are true or false, but we also use language to do things. We use language to make things happen. And those might not always be true or false things. So these are the 2 reasons that truth conditions don't tell the whole story. And so these are reasons we need some kind of way to explain and understand where the rest of meaning comes from. And that's what pragmatics is. Nevertheless, there is a reason that we talked about truth conditions, and there's a reason that the idea of truth conditions can be useful for pragmatics. And one reason is it helps us tell the difference between where pragmatic, where semantic meaning ends and pragmatic meaning begins. So if we think back to 2 modules ago, we talked about different levels of meaning. We talked about that abstract meaning and utterance meaning and force. We could also think of that in terms of what is said, which is basically the utterance meaning, and what is meant, which is the force. But we never really settled on a clear definition of where you draw the line between what is said and what is meant, right? So we considered ideas like what is meant is something that's based on the context, but what is said might also be based on context. So it's hard to divide between them. But as we will see right now, truth conditions can be a helpful way to distinguish between these 2 different parts of meaning. So let's take one example. If I say a sentence like, Prakash is from Wisconsin, but he's smart. Literally, what this means is, he's from Wisconsin and he's smart, right? But the literal meaning of but is basically the same as the meaning of and. It means these 2 things are true. Number 1, Prakash is from Wisconsin, and number 2, he's smart. But there's also kind of a pragmatic meaning here. If someone says Prakash is from Wisconsin, but he's smart, they are hinting that there's something more going on, right? What they're really hinting is, because they said the word but, they mean there's kind of a mismatch between being from Wisconsin and being smart. Those things don't normally go together. Or in other words, Wisconsin people tend to be stupid. Right? So that's another meaning that you might get out of this sentence. So this is an example of what is said and what is meant, right? Or utterance meaning and force. The question that we were stuck at the end of 2 modules ago is, how do we distinguish between these meanings? Like, how do we draw the line between where does the utterance meaning come from and where does the force come from? Or what is the boundary between utterance meaning and force? If we think about truth conditions, this can give us a way to see that. So utterance meaning is truth conditional meaning. It's semantic meaning. We can see that the truth conditions for the sentence, Prakash is from Wisconsin, but he's smart, are like, number 1, he has to be from Wisconsin, and number 2, he has to be smart. So if I say this sentence, and if Prakash is actually not from Wisconsin, what I said is false, right? So this is truth conditional meaning. It will make the things true or false. The force, or the what is meant, right? This idea that Wisconsin people are not smart, that's not truth conditional, and it doesn't make the sentence true or false. So if you think about if the reality is that Wisconsin people are not stupid, and then I say, Prakash is from Wisconsin, but he's smart, that doesn't mean that I said something false. It means that I said something weird. I said something that doesn't really make sense. I said something that is not really appropriate to say, but I didn't say something false, right? So this is, thinking of truth conditions is one way that we can see the difference between what is said and what is meant, right? That what is said has truth conditions and it can be true or false, whereas what is meant is not part of the truth conditions of a sentence, and it doesn't make the sentence true or false.